Bruce Hanson is an award-winning author of short fiction. His stories have been published in several anthologies. He has been recognized many times, including winning first place in the 2019 Royal Canadian Legion Seniors Literary Competition, and he was longlisted in the 2016 Ontario Writers' Conference Story Starter Contest, and he won third place in the 2013 Lifestyle Magazine's Nonfiction Northern Living Contest. And as well, he won a second place in the Brendan Donnelly Award for Children's Literature in 1996. Bruce is a member of the Muskoka Authors Association, the Barrie Writers Club, and the Writers Community of York Region. He has been a feature reader at Word Up Barrie and was interviewed on Daytime on Rogers Cable. He and a friend had been featured on Cottage Cheese on Cottage Live TV for their Beer Me Zipline. Bruce will be reading from the opening chapter of his short story, The Performer. The story takes place in London in the 1850s.
This is from the short story, The Performer, part of chapter 1. Music billowed through the cavernous concert hall. Each note hung in the air like a leaf in a tiny updraft, waiting to be spun away by a northern gust of replacements. Hypnotic and soothing, the music spread a cloak of peace over the audience, their collective emotional state almost sighing. A field of frozen faces and limp smiles stared up at him, their eyes transfixed on the temporary sun of their universe, soaking up his energy. Franz babied the strings a little longer and then began stroking them with authority. The sound lifted, arced, and drove forward into the hall, building in pace and intensity with each vibration. Back straightened, toes twitched, feet began to drum the floor. Certainly, this was unacceptable behavior for such a concert. But then, who had the power to avoid it? And who would ever blame them? Franz had them in his grip. He elevated their spirits as one, carried them into the clouds, and then set them gently on a rolling hill in some distant emerald pasture, thirsting for more. He thrust his bow skyward in triumph. Raven hair fell like a closing curtain over his face. He took his bow. The audience stood and roared, and roared, and roared. Bravo, bravissimo, encore, encore. But there would not be an encore. Not tonight. Not ever. The audience knew this, but it didn't stop them from cheering, from trying, from hoping. Franz strode off stage, his Stradivarius clamped under his arm. He returned for a second bow and then took his leave. 5 minutes passed before the applause subsided, and the crowd began to disperse down the aisles and out to waiting carriages. Everyone, that was, except the young woman, a lamppost of a girl, plainly dressed in black, with a red rose pinned to her dress and another pinned to the side of her frayed hat. She stood in the standing room only section, silent and unmoving, as she had throughout the entire concert and ensuing applause. It took 15 minutes for the hall to empty. A half hour later, the cleaners had fulfilled their purpose and left. When the time came, as she knew it would, she watched Franz stroll back onto the stage, fit the violin under his chin, and delicately, ever so delicately, begin to play. If his previous performance had been gripping, if the concert had been mesmerizing, then what could be said of this private performance? It was divine. No, not enough. It was angelic. Still not adequate. The feelings it stirred were intense, intimate, consuming, breathtaking. This was love. The pure, raw, and often sorrowful passion of love. Nothing else could be said of it. Marie Fleury suspected that she was the only one who had ever heard it. On a dreary and hazy night, she had stumbled through the back door of the concert hall looking for shelter. Having uncharacteristically imbibed several pints of ale through the day, She had outmaneuvered the unwanted advances of several customers and wound up staggering down an alley. Seeking a place of rest away from the mist that chilled what little flesh cloaked her bones, she had entered the first unlocked door she had found. She hadn't really known where she was, nor had she cared. It was dry, relatively warm, and there was the faintest thread of beautiful music wafting in the air. She followed the sound through several dim halls until she found herself in the wings of a large stage. There in the middle was a man, a bold, beautiful man in formal dress, obviously a gentleman. It was from him that the music came. Somehow she knew it was from him rather than his instrument. The violin was simply the outlet. She could have sworn her heart stopped, paused at least. When it started again, it felt as though it were outside her body, pressing inward with each beat. It rode the music this gentleman generated. From that night forward, she had followed him as best she could, asking a friend at one of the better inns to watch for notices of where he would play. She used what little money she had to visit nearby towns where he performed, always staying after the concert, crouched and hidden, waiting for the inevitable performance that began after the audience and staff had gone home, the one he performed for himself and unknowingly for her. This time, however, she did not hide, because tonight the music had come home. Franz Straumeister had returned to London, to the same concert hall where she had first heard him. Franz loved this hall. There was warmth in the acoustics that made the air richer than anywhere else he played. He walked onto the stage, barely paused to place his instrument under his chin, and then lost himself in his music. It wasn't that he didn't put his heart into the scheduled concert. He most certainly did. But what he played now was his soul. Each note originated from the sensual pleasure that was part of his being. The performance was sacred, and he shared it with no one. No one had ever been worthy, not his fans, not his sponsors, and certainly not his critics. The first piece, came from his heart and was always created on the morning of the concert. The second he'd composed long ago for one who had left him in pain, taking his soul with her and leaving him with this piece of music in its stead. It was the only tie that remained. Marie Fleury knew what to expect. The private concert never varied. It consisted of two pieces. The first was different each time. The second always the same. He would end with a deep bow and then exit the stage. She was careful not to reveal her presence and never dared to applaud. The music was not for her to hear, or anyone else for that matter. The magic of the first piece captivated her more than ever before. The liveliness of its tempo was sunnier than the others she had heard. The notes were somehow warmer, the effect relaxing her muscles like a fire in a nearby hearth. Thoughts and inhibitions slipped away. When the second piece began, she allowed her guard to slip. She sacrificed herself to it, doing something unplanned and unexpected, something that startled her surely as much as it must have startled him. She filled her lungs and sang. She didn't know the words, if there'd ever been any written. Still, that didn't matter. She was intimate with the music's emotions. Her voice rang out, saturating the hall with a luscious syrup of sound. She was taken aback by its quality, much richer than when she crooned in the beer halls, where drunken patrons, more interested in her body lyrics than the range of her voice, would oogle her bosom and grab her buttocks each time she bent to serve them. Feeling detached, she considered that it wasn't her efforts producing the sound, but rather the gentleman's music being played through her. If she was a conduit, that was fine. She sang on.